Hello and welcome to Introduction to Compensatory Education, CE Monitoring. My name is Hamid Razawi, and I have had the pleasure of making this presentation in the past 2 years. And I just wanted to start the presentation by saying a heartfelt thank you to all of you for what you have done so far. To say that these are unprecedented time is an understatement. So I want to say thank you to all of you for what you have done so far and what you're going to do. I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Girk Jackpaul, in making this information available to you. So Girk and I, along with other consultants, we work for an office called TIMSO, Title I Monitoring and Support Office, and many of you are quite familiar with CDE's organizational chart. So we work for a division called Student Achievement and Support Division, which falls under California Department of Education. You're watching this presentation, listening to it, because your district is scheduled to have what's called an FPM review, or Federal Program Monitoring Review. Many of you, I have no doubt, are quite experienced and have had this training in person from myself and my colleagues in the past or the years before from other staff members. So a lot of the information is around here in this presentation may be a repeat to you, but there are a lot of staff members who are new. So we're hoping this is useful to you. This presentation has a number of outcomes. So at minimum, you will learn about the CE item requirements. We will review the CE instrument in its entirety. We will talk about frequently non-compliant items, just to give you a perspective of the items that have been non-compliant in the past, meaning it somehow was challenging to other LEAs. And then the last one is, how do you prepare for a successful FPM review in general, but more specifically as it relates to CE or Title I. Again, on the onset, when you look at our instrument, at the end of each requirement, there is a citation. It's a sort of a legalese way of doing things. So if you are wondering where we get the authority, it comes from ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act citations. This is just a reference slide. If you're interested in finding out where they're coming from, you could look at USC, or United States Code, or ESSA section 1117. So these are just some of the examples. In the next slide, which is this one, we give you a comparison chart. Again, completely as a background, as a way of extra information for you, if you wanted to see where we get the information on our instrument. As I don't have to tell you, our world education in general is full and replete with acronyms. Most of them are quite familiar to you, but just again, for those of you who are brand new to this process, the first one is perhaps one of the most important one, and that's CMT, or California Department of Education Monitoring Tool. That is the platform by which or through which you, as the LEA coordinator of FPM programs or FPM review, and we as reviewers communicate. Of course, we can email, of course, we can make phone calls, but we always encourage the staff to make all communications and at the end compile everything in CMT. That's our medium, that's our platform, and that's just one way of housing all the relevant information as they relate to the FPM process. So there is an actual training for that platform, for that web-based information, I guess the housing information. The next items or the next acronyms are all very familiar to you, I'm sure. If you're working in federal and state projects, you know what CARS is. That's the vehicle by which the sites are receiving their Title I funds. This review is under the umbrella FPM, or Federal Program Monitoring. You're quite familiar with LEA, SSC, and SPSA. The last two may be a bit new to some of you, or maybe just a little bit unclear. So briefly, there are two types of Title I schools. We SWAP and the other one TOS. And SWAP, as you could see, stands for school-wide programs, and TOS is for targeted assistance schools. So this slide, as you can see, it just gives you the overview of what an FPM overview entails and who gets it. So essentially, every K through 12 public education receives it. So when you look at slide bullet number 1, County Office of Education, school districts, direct funded charter schools, everyone could be on the list for receiving an FPM review. There are a lot more information on our website as to which cohort you belong to and whether your review is online or on-site, and it rotates every 2 years. A lot of information is in our website, and we could always give you extra information after this review. The process of review is basically just to ensure that we as an SEA or state educational agency, we are ensuring that the federal funds and the monies that are spent on from those funds, that they meet certain requirements for policy, planning, and allowable use of those funds. The last bullet is important just for those of you who are new, that FPM and CE review are not synonymous. Under the umbrella FPM, we are not the only one. And it says you may have other program reviews, and you might as well read that as more than likely you will have other program reviews. This presentation, once again, is exclusively about Title I or CE review. This slide is very familiar to those of you who have had this training in the past, and we essentially divided the FPM process to online and on-site. And due to this pandemic, there will not be any on-site reviews for a foreseeable future. And what I mean by that is that until, or at least until January of 2021, there is no on-site review. So bullet number 1 talks about all reviews. As I mentioned before, every communication that you and I do has to be documented in the CMT. The uploads that you do is in CMT. The comments that reviewers like Girk and myself and other reviewers do, everything is recorded in CMT. So that's for every review. Part 2 and part 3, as you could see, are only doable when it's an on-site review. So that part 2 talks about classroom observation of program implementation, and part 3 talks about interviews with staff who are paid with Title I funds, administrators who are paid with Title I funds, and school site council members. Both of them are only on-site reviews. Just a slight caveat right now that at least for the next few months, all reviews will be telemonitored, meaning it's sort of an online, but it's kind of a hybrid because we are planning to have interviews done virtually. Which platform or how, the details will be known a little bit later. We just wanted for you to be grounded on our instrument. So our instrument is developed and reviewed by our department, which is California Department of Education. As I alluded to in the first couple of slides, the authority or the expectations that that we have from the LEAs is it's because it's in the federal and ESSA, and the state law once in a while comes into play as well. So it corresponds with changes in the federal or state laws. And just to make things transparent, at the end of each requirement, there is a legal citation and evidence request. So it's clear for you where we get that authority and how do you meet that requirement. Again, just to be of further assistance to you, the instrument itself is located in CDE's website. Once you have access to this PowerPoint in electronic format, you could just click on that link, or an easier way would be if you go to CDE's website, there's a search box, and if you just type CE instrument, you will see the document in Word format. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with ESSA, the document itself. If you wanted to access it, you could use any search engine or go to CDE's website and have access to that document. Again, we're living in unprecedented time during this pandemic. There are a lot of information about COVID-19 as it relates to the schools and LEAs. And again, our website, the link is right there. The last slide that I present to you before I jump it back to my colleague, Girk Jackpal, is to give you a perspective of what has been some of the, or what have been some of the most frequently non-compliant items. And for historical reasons, we just want to give you the last year, 2019, 2020, based on 116 reviews online and on site. The top 5 in no specific order have been the following. School family engagement policy, emphasis on the word school because there is one for the LEA as well. Second one is SSC or Schoolsite Council composition. The third bullet talks about the disbursement of funds through CARS. The fourth one is administrative charges, also known as time and effort, and also used to be known as time accounting. And the last, and definitely a very important item, is the SSC evaluating the services that are listed in SPSA. Very briefly, I will give you the perspective of our reviewers and myself as to why we think some of these items have been frequently non-compliant. The first one, briefly again, is because this item is so comprehensive. It takes about 2 pages on CMT under requirement, or if you look at our instrument. So there are a lot of sub-requirements within that one requirement. So it's very much feasible and viable that there are sites that are missing some of those elements. The second one, SSC composition, is interesting because most of the time it's because it's just a site is having a hard time getting, for instance, 5 family/parent and community members. They are, for the most part, okay with the school side, but just do not get enough parents from the other side. So the composition is not proper. Sometimes the composition may be proper, but they cannot furnish evidence that members were actually chosen and elected by their peers. Or in some small minorities, and some, by minority, I mean the small number of LEAs or districts, there are still places that sites are not familiar with the idea of parity or the idea of teachers being the majority. And we will talk about it in greater details. The third one, the disbursement of funds consistent with CARS, I just want you to know, and Girk will talk about this as well, is that we understand the idea of projections, that sometimes it's a projection and it may not be what shows in a site's SPSA. We understand that completely. None of these findings are straightforward. We seek clarification from you. We do a lot of back and forth with you. But even with all the back and forths, if there is no acceptable answer as to why what's shown in CARS and what's shown in a site's SPSA are very much apart, if you cannot provide an evidence for that or an acceptable answer, it may have been a finding for that. Time and accounting, I will talk about it in greater details, but again, for a number of reasons, it has been a finding. The last one is essentially a spectrum. Either the idea of evaluation is completely new to a site, so that's just one spectrum. The other side of it is somewhere in the middle, that they have some shape or form an evaluation, but evaluation doesn't really do justice to the services that they do. Again, these are very complex items, and none of them are one-shot gotcha kind of findings. There's a lot of give and take between you as FPM coordinators and us as reviewers. So with that, I believe my colleague Girk will start with item number 1.
Hello, everyone. My name is Girk Jagpal, and I'm one of the CE reviewers, and I will be doing this presentation along with Hamed. So the first item that LEAs will be reviewed for during their compensatory education, or also known as Title I, is CE1. This is our LEA parent and family engagement. This item requires the local governing board of each LEA receiving Title I Part A funding to jointly develop with, agree upon, and distribute to families and parent members of participating children a written parent and family engagement policy. CE1, as mentioned in this slide, requires that if an LEA receives at least $500,000 from Title I Part A, they must set aside at least 1% of their total allocation for parent and family engagement activities. And of that 1%, at least 90% must go directly to the school sites for parent and family engagement policies. If a LEA determines necessary, they are allowed to exceed the minimum required 1% for parent and family engagement, but they must at least expend the minimum requirement. We cannot emphasize this enough, and I will repeat this several times, but when developing your parent and family engagement policies, it's essential, as Hamed mentioned in the previous slides, that you ensure the policy contains all the legal requirements outlined under CE1 of the instrument. Since these policies must be jointly developed, LEAs will want to ensure that they involve parents in the decisions pertaining to the parent-family engagement policies. A common issue that we see with the LEA and parent-family engagement policies is that they might be missing one of the key required elements that are outlined in CE1. So this slide here, it covers some of the key content areas that you'll want to ensure that your policy describes. So the policy shall describe how the LEA is providing parents with assistance and training to better support their child. The policy shall describe how the LEA is providing parents with strategies to improve their child's academic success and how to help their children learn at school or learn at home. The policy shall describe how the LEA is providing consistent and effective two-way communication. The policy shall describe how the LEA is training staff to communicate effectively with parents. And the policy shall describe how the LEA is integrating and coordinating parent and family engagement activities with other programs. So these requirements that are included under CE1 here on these slides can also be found on the program instrument for further viewing. So in order to meet the legal requirements of CE1, you will need the following pieces of evidence and upload them into CMT. So first, your LEA's actual parent and family engagement policy. So usually LEAs, they can find this policy under BP and or AR 6020. As advised and mentioned several times already, and I apologize if I sound like a broken record, prior to uploading any policy, please look it over, run it past the instrument, and ensure that it includes all the required elements that are under CE1 of the instrument. If for any reason you need help with this item, the CDE does have policy templates that the LEA can use as a guide. Next, you need to provide meeting agendas, minutes, and sign-in sheets from parent committee meetings during which the policy was jointly developed. If your meeting was held over an online or digital platform, then we as consultants, we do definitely understand that it might be possible to get actual live signatures for a sign-in sheet. So in this case, you will want to ensure that you take very detailed documentation that clearly shows who was present, along with the role that they play or any other necessary details. You will need to provide documentation that shows the parent and family engagement policy was evaluated for effectiveness by the parents. And this can be captured in meeting minutes and agendas, and along with any evaluation documentation that was used. And finally, for CE1, you will need to provide evidence of the LEA level parent and family engagement policy being distributed on an annual basis. So for example, LEAs that are being reviewed in 2021, you'll need to provide evidence that the policy was distributed in 2021. Moving on to CE2, this item is similar to CE1, except CE2 is for the individual school sites that receive Title I Part A funds. This item requires that each school that is served under Title I Part A to jointly develop with and distribute to parents and family members of participating children a written parent and family engagement policy to meet the changing needs of parents and the school. So once again, it's very similar to CE1, but the difference is the requirements are more at the site level, whereas CE1, the requirements were at the district level. This and the next few slides mention some of the requirements for the individual school sites funded with Title I. So just like with CE1, there were requirements at the LEA level. For CE2, there are requirements for the policy at the site level. So each Title I site must provide assistance to parents in understanding the challenging state and local standards, assessments, and requirements of Title I Part A. Each Title I site must provide materials and training to help parents work with their children. Continuing on from the previous slide, each Title I site must educate staff in the value of communicating with parents. Each Title I site must coordinate and integrate parent involvement programs and activities with other programs. And each Title I site must ensure information related to school and parent activities is sent to the parents of participating children. So you might notice by now a common theme here is communication and just getting information out to your parents in regards to the Title I program. So there's often significant overlap with our Title I students and those from the SPED, migrant, and EL subgroups. So this portion of CE2 basically addresses those groups. So it states that schools shall provide opportunities for informed participation, including parent and family members who have limited English proficiency, parents and family members with disabilities, and parents and family members of migratory students. So our goal is we really want to make sure we're providing and servicing all our Title I parents, regardless of the variety of needs that they might have. When submitting your school level policies, each school site that is receiving Title I funds will want to ensure that their policies have the required elements of CE2, which are listed in the instrument. This and the following slide will cover some of the policy content requirements. Each school policy shall describe how the school will convene an annual meeting. So usually this is a meeting where the site admin will share with the parents information on the site's Title I program. When I used to be a principal, I would talk to my parents and explain why we're eligible for Title I dollars. I would share information about school site council, how to get involved, and basically all things related to Title I. Each school policy will need to describe how the school site offers flexible number of meetings and opportunities for meetings as requested by the parents. So for example, if you have a community where parents work during the day, well, then it might not make a lot of sense to hold your meetings during the school day when nobody can attend or very limited amount of parents can attend. We want to give everybody, especially our parents of Title I students, equal opportunity to participate in the program and provide input. Each school policy will need to describe how the site involves parents in the planning, review, and improvement of the site's Title I program and academic policy. Continuing on with the site's policy content from the previous slide, each site's policy will need to describe how the site provides timely information about the Title I program, curriculum, and assessment to parents of participating students. And the site's policy will need to describe how parents can submit any comments on the school plan, also known as a SPSA if you're a school-wide program, when the school makes the plan available to the LEA. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, this information is available in detail under CE2 of the program instrument for your viewing. Along with the school level parent engagement policy, CE2 also includes another jointly developed document called the School Parent Compact. This document describes the school's responsibility to provide high quality curriculum and instruction and addresses the importance of communication between teacher and parents on an ongoing, consistent basis. So in order to meet the legal requirements of CE2, you will need to upload the following into CMT. First of all, your school's parent and family engagement policy, along with the compact. If you need support with this item, the CDE has templates that you can use to guide your work. When submitting your site policies, once again, my suggestion is that when you receive them from your Title I school site principals, please look over the policies and compacts and ensure that they include all the requirements and elements listed in CE2 of the instrument. Next, you will need to provide meeting agendas, meeting minutes, and sign-in sheets from parent committee meetings during which the policy and compact were developed. And obviously for safety reasons, we do understand that you might choose to hold your meetings over a digital platform like many LEAs are doing. If that's the case, once again, it might not be possible to get actual signatures for a sign-in sheet. And in this case, you will want to ensure that you have detailed documentation that clearly communicates and captures who is virtually present in the meeting, along with their roles and any other necessary details, and that will work. Also, you'll need to provide records of activities for building parent capacity. So this can be documentation such as flyers from activities that involve parents, where they're being held, where parents are being helped in becoming more equipped to support their children in their schooling. Some examples of activities for building parent capacity can include parent literacy nights and back to school nights. Those are just some few examples that we see on a consistent basis. And finally, for CE2, you will need to provide evidence of annual distribution of the school level parent and family engagement policy and compact. If you're being reviewed during the 2021 school year, you will need to provide evidence of the policy distribution during the 2021 school year. Some schools will send out their policies and compacts in hard copy, and some will actually have parents return signed slips saying that they have read the policy and compact. Some will post it online and send communication out to their parents, just giving them a heads up that the policy and compact are available for viewing. Item 3 for CE is the private school consultation and participation. If you're a single school district and a charter school or county office of ed, you will not need to worry about this item as it is not monitored for you. So for this item, the LEA will need to determine if there are any eligible students who reside within the attendance area and attend private schools. The LEA shall consult with appropriate private school officials during the design and development of the Title I Part A program. And if the private school decides to participate, the LEA will need to provide equitable educational services and benefits to address the needs of the Title I eligible students who happen to attend those private schools. LEAs need to keep in mind that they're responsible for providing services and supports, and that they shouldn't give Title I funds directly to the private school. This slide here for CE 3, it just gives a brief overview of the entire process of private school consultation and participation. So after an LEA has determined which schools are serving eligible students, they must notify the school of their eligibility. Usually this is in the form of a letter that goes out to the private school, letting them know that they have students who are eligible for services. Once the notification letters have gone out, the next step is typically a consultation that takes place with eligible private school officials. This is where the details and requirements of the program are shared, And in the next slide, I will actually cover this in more detail. After the consultation has occurred, the LEA will need to hold an affirmation, or the LEA will need to actually hold on to affirmations that are signed by the eligible private schools, and the affirmations will state that the consultation took place between the LEA and the private school. This slide here describes the consultation in more detail. So the consultation takes place, so when the consultation takes place, it shall provide agreement between the LEA and the private schools on the eligibility criteria and method. So how did they determine or define how a student is eligible for Title I Part A services? The consultation shall provide agreement on how the children needs will be identified with the program or services that are being offered with Title I Part A. The consultation will need to provide agreement on what, how, where, and when, and by whom the services will be offered. The consultation will need to provide agreement on how the services will be assessed for effectiveness, and the consultation will need to provide agreement on the process regarding the delivery of the services to eligible private school children. And once again, as a reminder, these requirements can all be found under CE3 of the Title I instrument. So in order to meet the requirements of CE3, you'll need to upload the following items into CMT. First of all, you'll need your notices of eligibility to private schools. This is, as I mentioned earlier, often in the form of a letter that goes out to private schools servicing eligible students who reside within the LEA's attendance area. You'll need to provide documentation for consultation with private schools. This can be anywhere from agenda, meeting minutes, sign-in sheets from the consultation, along with any additional documentation. We will need a description of the equitable services that are being provided to the private school programs. And finally, a signed private school affirmation stating that consultation between the private school and the LEA took place. For this item, it's important that you upload documentation for each school that is participating, each private school that's participating. So for example, if you have 5 schools that are eligible for services, then you'll need to provide documentation that shows that each school was provided, or a notice of eligibility was sent out to each school and was consulted with for services. For this item, we often get questions on what do I do if private schools decline services? Which they do have the right to do. So if a private school declines services, you'll want to ensure that you keep record of any communication or documentation showing that they did decline services. Moving on to CE4, foster youth. This item states that an LEA shall collaborate with the state or local child welfare agency to designate a point of contact within the LEA for all issues related to foster youth, and that the LEA shall collaborate with state or local child welfare agency to develop written procedures governing how transportation to maintain children in foster youth in their school of origin will be provided, arranged, and funded as applicable. So when you're developing your foster youth transportation procedures, LEAs and all parties involved will want to make sure that the procedures ensure prompt transportation in a cost-effective manner, and that there's an agreement for how any additional transportation costs are covered. We don't want our students to miss out on any valuable instructional time, and having these procedures and policies completed really ensures that it's less likely to happen. So they get into the classroom quicker. In order to meet the requirements for CE4, LEAs must provide the following evidence into CMT. So the first item that we need is we need identification of who the foster youth point of contact is. And this can be as simple as putting a comment into CMT under CE4 and stating the name of the individual who serves this role. So just a simple comment will do for this. And also LEAs must upload the full foster youth transportation procedures that address the requirements of CE4. If for whatever reason you can't find this document, there's a good chance you can call your local county office of education and they might have it. And now with that, with CE4 being completed, I'm going to pass the mic on to Mr. Rizawi, who will be covering CE5 through CE8.
Thank you and welcome back. This in the beginning that most of you know this by now. You must have received communication from the FPM office, but please know that this is not the only piece of information that you're receiving. I cannot say this enough that we're here to assist you every step of the way. So this is a lot of information, and Gurk and I will do our best to make it comprehensible and understandable for you. But please do know that there will be opportunities. So one of them, you must have received an invitation for a Q&A session. I believe it's on the 30th of this month, next month. But beyond that, just know that the last few slides, Gurk will go over, our email and contact information. You're free to contact us anytime through email. We work just like you from home remotely, but we're very responsive. The second part is that once you have access to CMT or the platform that I talked about in the beginning, you will know the name and the contact information of the reviewer specific to your site or to your LEA, I should say, and then you can contact them directly or make comments in CMT. So there are multiple ways that we could be of assistance to you. With that, we're moving to what we call CE5 or Schoolsite Composition. The LEA coordinators who are listening to this, if you have principals in the audience, meaning principals are listening to this presentation, hello again to you. And as a former admin, I want to say thank you to you. This is up your alley, meaning that Schoolsite Council is something that you do at the site level. It is a state requirement rather than the federal requirement, which most of our instrument is talking about. So briefly, if you have a school plan for student achievement or SPSA, you must have an SSC. They go hand in hand. There has been, and it continues to be, an exception for single site school district or charter schools. And as you know, you could have used your LCAP to serve as SPSA. And I say you could have used because, again, things have changed so much during this pandemic and because of this pandemic. So for now, just briefly, the LCAP, it has been postponed, and there's a document called Learning Continuity Plan. So for this upcoming year, 2020 and 2021, if you are a charter school or a single school district, you will need to have a SPSA. I will leave that comment, this piece of information right here, and will not delve deeper into it simply because it does not impact everyone. If you are a charter school, please contact your reviewer, and that person will be happy to work out the details with you. So, sorry for the pause technology. So Schoolsite Council, as you know, the composition is very prescriptive. And by that, I mean, there's a minimum number of people that should be in that council. So when I used to present this in person, I used to say, imagine for a second, visualize a table. There are 5 people on one side and 5 on the other side. That is your minimum. 5 on one side are staff, people who are paid by the district and by that site. 5 on the other side are parents/community members. So that's the minimum requirement. Parity must be maintained, which is what I just said, 5 and 5 being equal. From the 5 of the school side, teachers must be the majority, which in this case means 3. And every member should be elected by their peer group, meaning teachers by teachers, other staff by other staff, parents by parents. There are two models and they're very similar. SSC model for the elementary school, as I mentioned, the minimum is 5. The principal of the site or his or her designee is always a must. There is no election process for that. Classroom teachers who are employed at the site. The reason we put employed at the site, just so we clear the confusion that just because they're teachers, they could be a parent as well. So employed at the site. In other school personnel, it just says who are not teachers. And we have had this question in the past that can they be a psychologist? Can they be a custodian? Can they be an office manager? The law is silent on that. It just says who are not teachers. And then the other side of it is community. And the reason it doesn't say just parents is because, as many of you know, they could be community members, meaning members who do not necessarily have children at the site. They may have had in the past, or they're just community member. Now, secondary model, as I said, it's very similar to elementary model. The only difference is the inclusion of student or students. So as you could see, the top part is exactly the same as the elementary model. The bottom part, or number 2, it says parent or community members. The second bullet says students. And I will further explain what we mean by this. This is a visual chart. So if you could see elementary minimum, secondary minimum. Principal, as you could see, it's a must, so it's 1 and 1. Teachers, not only being members, but being the majority, it's exactly the same, 3 and 3. Other staff, whoever they are, 1 and 1. As you could see under elementary minimum, so 5 on the parent community side, 0 on students, because you're not required, you do not need, you will not have students. Now the secondary part, the top part is the same, 1 plus 3 plus 1, 5 people. The bottom portion under the red line, it still is 5, but in this model, we have 3 parent community members and 2 students. And the reason I say in this model, because conversely, that could have been 4 and 1. So I will leave it at that. And again, if something is unclear, please know that this is not the only chance. You will have plenty of chances to interact with us. The bottom part is just to reiterate that Ed Code says the SSC has to be properly composed and ensure parity between school and community, meaning both sides are equal in terms of the number. What do we expect from you? Records of SSC peer selection. Again, the law is silent on how the selection and election takes place. If it's electronically, then you can give us that evidence. If it's paper ballot, then you can give us that. Whichever way you're doing, just make sure that there are election and nomination processes. The next 2 slides, I will touch on them very briefly for the following reason, that a great number of sites that have been selected for this upcoming year, this will not impact them. But please do know that Assembly Bill 716 or AB 716 gave the sites a couple of flexibilities so that if they were in close proximity in some areas and they are small schools, if they wanted to join their school site councils, they are given that flexibility. If this fits your description, or if you're interested in pursuing something like that, again, please contact your reviewer and we'll be happy to help you out. But typically, the sites that have been selected are 300 and more. They need to have a school site council, and the requirement that I just mentioned is applicable to them. Again, the SSC flexibility number 2, again, it's the same thing, that if you have less than 300 students, there is an alternate way of meeting that composition requirement. If this fits your description of one of the sites that has been selected for review, you will contact your reviewer, and then that reviewer will proceed accordingly. As you could see in the second bullet, because we said your LCAP could be used in lieu of your SPSA, hence school site council becomes not a requirement, if that's a good way of saying it. So if you are a school site that is a charter school, then since you are using your LCAP, the SSC would not have been applicable to you. But we would need the evidence for other stakeholders who have reviewed your LCAP. So just like Girk did, we finish the requirement for each item, and then we tell you how you can meet those requirements, or what is the evidence request. So in this case, as you could see, peer selection that I already talked about, the roster itself, you could upload that one page, or since you have already uploaded the SPSA, we see that already in somewhere at the end of your SPSA. Please also know, and those of your experience, you know this one, that CMT does not allow students' name because they're minors. So please ensure the names of students are redacted before you upload them. If you upload them, it's not the end of the world. We just remind you that the document is not locked. Please remove it, redact the names of students, and upload again. This is what we call CE6, and essentially everything that's in SPSA, that's what your school site activities are. So with that, I just wanted to go over some of the items as it pertains to a SPSA. First and foremost, it has to be developed with school site council, with their input, with their collaboration. And you know this, that it has to be based on comprehensive needs assessment, and it must include methods and strategies that have been proven and they're evidence-based, and the budget and expenditures are aligned with the people who are doing the actual work. The law is silent on how often, but it does say that the SPSA is regularly monitored and revised as necessary, that it is available to an LEA, of course it will be, but also to the public, and it is developed in coordination with other programs such as English learners, students with disabilities, foster, and so on. Now, this is where we take a little pause and refer back to what I said in the beginning, that there are two types of Title I school, a SWAP or school-wide program, or TAS, or Targeted Assistance School. So for TAS, the CDE stance has been that we do not require a SPSA. So obviously the logical question is, then what do you need from us? Well, what we need is for you to tell us, how do you determine which students will be served? The law calls that eligible students. So you need to have what's called an objective criteria. And then what are the resources that you're using to help those eligible students meet the standards, and what effective methods and instructional strategies are you using? These are only applicable if the site that's reviewed is a TAS or Targeted Assistance School. Again, please, I cannot say this enough. We are here to help you. If you're new to this and this is way too much information, please know that we are here and we'll walk you through every one of them. To continue with TAS, because again, these are the sites with the minimum number of Title I students. So the expectation is that you coordinate with a regular education, and perhaps that should be in a quotation, whatever that means, regular education program of the site. The staff who is engaged in doing the work, they should have above and beyond PD or professional development so they can help those students better. And the eligible children's parents, they have to have a voice in the services that you're providing to their students. And again, needless to say that you are coordinating and integrating not only the federal, but state and local programs and regular education program in those activities and services. Again, similar to what we have been doing so far. Now the question comes, how do I provide the evidence? Well, SPSA will be repeated throughout this presentation and throughout the instrument. So obviously for a school-wide program, SPSA is the most important document. And SSC reviewing the SPSA, meaning that they had an input in creating it, and they have continuous improvement in monitoring and evaluating it. And then Conversely, for sites that are taught, some kind of a program summary and an expenditure report that shows how you're spending those funds. This is one of those items that are quite straightforward, and there are a few of them in this instrument. This is just notices in parents' primary languages, whatever primary languages are used and needed at your community, at your district. So you could see the requirement that you're required to ensure that information related to school and everything else is sent in the language that the parents can understand. In this case, it's the primary language. In other words, a language other than English. It's a very simple, straightforward request, 2 or 3 samples per site. So if your site has 3 schools under review, perhaps 2 from each site, no matter what the document is. Documents that are, the length of it doesn't matter, I should say. Those documents in a language other than English that the community use, 1 or 2 samples from the LEA, and we're done with this item. And it's worth mentioning that we hardly ever have any finding on this item. I have one more item, and I believe Girk will join us in a couple of minutes. So this is a rather extensive item, but still somewhat straightforward. We used to call this teacher's credential, but now we call it parent notification of teacher qualifications. So for this one, what we need is that the notice that the families are informed that they can ask about their children or their child's teacher's authorization in a Title I school. So if you're a Title I school that you have in some shape or form informed the community or going to inform the community that they have the right to ask who is their child's teacher and what kind of authorizations they have. I say straightforward, not simple, but straightforward is that every district has some shape or form. There's a document that shows teacher's credentials. So we only need it for the sites that are going to be reviewed. So in that imaginary example of 3 sites, then you will upload the credentials for teachers at those 3 sites. There's a thing called a 4-week letter. That's for teachers who are not meeting the state requirement licensure. And you can look it up on CDE's website. You can contact your HR office if you're not listening to this presentation and you do something different from HR. And obviously the staff credential, I already talked about that. So with that, I believe Girk will share from here about the parent notification, and I will be back.
Thank you, Hamed. So next, I will be covering CE 9 through 12. CE 9 is a parental notification of EL status. This is another pretty straightforward item. This item states each LEA using Title I Part 8 funds or Title III funds to provide language instruction educational programs shall comply with the parent notification requirements, which I will share on the following slides. So for CE 9, there are 2 separate notifications that we will be looking for during the review. The first is the annual EL notification. This is a letter that goes out no later than 30 days after the beginning of the school year and informs the parents of their child and that the child has been identified as an English learner. This letter goes out to the parents of EL students for each year that the child remains as a EL. The second letter, which is different from the first one, is the initial EL notification. This is a letter that goes out to the parents of children who have been identified as ELs during the school year. The LEA needs to notify the parents of the child within the first 2 weeks of the child being placed in an EL program. On the next 3 slides, I will cover the content requirements for the EL notifications. You will want to ensure the EL notification letters contain the following information: the reason for the student being identified as an EL, the child's level of English proficiency and how those levels were assessed, the methods of instruction used in the EL programs that are being offered, and the method of instruction used in any other available EL programs if the district has more than one, and how the EL program will meet the educational strengths and needs of the child. Continuing on with the EL notification content, the letters must also include how the language acquisition program that's being offered will help the children learn English and meet standards. It must include information on how students can eventually exit the EL program. And if the child in question is on an IEP, then the letter needs to mention how the program meets the objectives and needs of the IEP plan. Finishing off the EL notification letter content for CE9, you'll want to ensure that the letters contain information pertaining to parental rights. These rights include the right to have your child removed from the program if the parent wishes, options that parents have to decline to enroll or to choose another EL program if they're available, and also assisting parents in selecting among various programs, once again, if the district offers more than one. And also, if these letters are being sent out to high school students, you'll also need to include a section that has expected graduation rates for EL students. In order to clear CE9, you will need one completed example of annual EL notification letter and one example of an initial EL notification letter. And when you're doing this, just please remember to make sure that any documents that are uploaded in the CMT are public documents. So we want to ensure that there are not any documents that contain student names or any confidential information. So before you do upload these documents, just please remember to redact any student names or any confidential information. And as a reminder, if you go under Title III Parent Notification on the CDE's website, there's actually templates that are available for both the annual and the initial letters, and there are actually templates in both English and Spanish. Moving on to CE10, Allocations and Reporting. This is, as Hamed mentioned in one of the beginning slides, this is one of the more common findings that we find. Here for this item, what we're doing is we as reviewers, we're ensuring that the LEA disperses Title I funds as they're reported in CARS. So as part of CE10, LEAs shall reserve Title I funds as they believe is needed to serve the needs of their homeless children, children in local institutions for neglected and delinquent children. So you want to focus on your high needs students. And as part of CE10, an LEA shall use the same measure of poverty when determining poverty levels for all schools within the district. An LEA shall also designate any school as eligible for Title I if the school has at least 35% of students from low-income families. And an LEA shall designate and serve a school that is not eligible, but they were eligible and served in the preceding year. They can actually choose to serve that school, but can only do so for one additional fiscal year. So for whatever reason, if free and reduced numbers changed or something happened to where a Title I school was no longer eligible for services, but they were the preceding year, the district can choose to actually serve them for one more year. And an LEA shall elect not to serve any eligible schools that has a higher percentage of children from low-income families. And then I know this is something that many of our LEAs are already aware of, but you cannot carry over more than 15% of your Title I allocations from one year to the next, but the state educational agency, in this case, the CDE, can grant you a waiver once every 3 years to carry over more than 15%. And we do understand There are some exceptions to this because of COVID and the recent outbreak. For more details on that, if you have any questions, feel free to find out who your reviewer is and reach out for those questions if you have any. This slide here shows the reconciliation process that we as reviewers do between SPSA, fiscal documents, and CARs. That means a site's Title I allocations reported in CARs must equal a site's total allocation as seen in the SPSA, and that value shall also match any fiscal documents. For example, as you can see in the red, CAR shows for this school district that they reported in CARs an allocation of $217,220, and then that actually matches up with what was budgeted in the expenditures of the SPSAs, and it also matches up with the fiscal documents or general ledgers. And we understand things don't always match up to the dollar, but we do expect that the numbers should be somewhere within the ballpark and they should be close. For CE10, the only evidence request we'll be looking for is the general ledger, sometimes referred to as the financial records. These will be used to reconcile with the SPSAs that we have uploaded in some of the earlier items, and also the CARs reporting. We'll be asking for general ledgers that contain Title I expenditures for specific sites. So for example, if you have 3 sites that are being reviewed, you might be asked to provide 3 general ledgers, 1 for each site. For LEA level Title I expenditures, we'll be asking for a separate general ledger, one separate from the sites, and that contains only LEA level expenditures. So for this, if you have any questions, once again, just feel free to contact your reviewer ahead of time, and we will gladly be of assistance. Moving on to CE11, this is our allowable use of funds. This item says the LEA shall expend Title I funds for the state and approved purpose. The LEA shall ensure all charges are reasonable, necessary, and allocable, and that at least 85% of funds go directly towards direct services for students. So that leaves at a maximum 15% that can be used for the administration of the Title I program. If you're a school site that is a targeted assistance school, or also known as a TAS, any staff members who are paid with Title I funds can assume limited duties, including those beyond classroom instruction or that do not benefit participating children, as long as the amount of the time spent on those duties is the same proportion of time as similar personnel at the same school. So the intent behind this is to incorporate your Title I staff into your TAS program or school as much as possible within limits. Next, moving on, we're going to talk a little bit with the next 3 slides. We're going to cover the authorized use of funds in regards to school-wide Title I programs and the activities and expenditures for SWAP programs. As you might already be aware of, all activities and expenditures must be aligned to help students meet the challenging state academic content standards. That's the purpose of Title I, is to close the achievement gap and help kids meet those challenging state standards. Also, activities and expenditures must meet the needs that have been identified through the completion of a comprehensive needs assessment. All activities and expenditures that are funded with Title I Part A must be a research and evidence-based educational strategy. Continuing on with the school-wide authorized use of funds. As mentioned in an earlier slide, activities and expenditures with Title I Part A funds must be reasonable, necessary, and allocable. All activities and expenditures must be included in the SPSA. This is a question we get a lot. If it's not in the SPSA, it is not allowable. Of course, we as reviewers, several of us have been site administrators, and we understand, things come up, there's changes throughout the year. So you can always make amendments and adjustments to your SPSAs, but just make sure you always go back to your school site council and allow them to provide input and feedback and get their approval before moving on with the actual expenditure. But if it's not in the SPSA, it is not allowable. All activities and expenditures need to be reviewed, approved, and recommended by the SSC to the local governing board. Speaking of school-wide programs and SPSAs, as mentioned, SPSAs must be approved by the local governing board. They must be approved by the board on an annual basis, and the SSC must annually evaluate the progress of the Title I program in accomplishing the SPSA goals. And the evaluation of the program is actually a separate review item that we will discuss in a little bit more detail under CE 19. And as a rule of thumb, if the LEA has not completed the items described in the authorized use of funds, the activities or expenditures will likely not be authorized under Title I. In order to meet the legal requirements of CE 11, we will need a list of several items. And this is, just as a heads up, one of the items that requires a lot, usually requires a lot of going back and forth between the reviewer and the district. So first, what we'll need is general ledgers for Title I Part A expenditures. To make things easier, you can always take the same general ledgers that were uploaded from CE 10 and link them to CE 11, because it's the exact same pieces of evidence. You will need your LEAs Title I reservation and services. This can be a document that has a detailed description of the amount for each reservation, such as your homeless, indirect admin, and what activities and expenditures those reservations went towards funding. You will need your SPSAs for all school-wide programs that are being reviewed. So if you have two schools that happen to be school-wide programs and they're being reviewed, you'll want to turn in a SPSA for each site. This is another piece of evidence that is required in another CE item, so you can always just link it to CE 11 and CMT. We'll also need a position control report for any employees who are paid out of Title I Part A. Typically, these reports will show what percentage of an employee is paid out of Title I, whether they're paid out of site Title I funds or LEA reservations. For those employees that are paid out of Title I Part A funds, we will need detailed duty statements. These are not the same as job descriptions, which is a common misconception. Job descriptions are typically vague. For example, a job description for a teacher would be very general, whereas a job description is much more detailed. We have to be able to read duty statements and use them to determine how an individual's position would be allowable with Title I. Duty statements often break specific job duties by percentage. Say you have an employee who is partially funded with Title I, then the duty statement would have the allowable duties broken up and separate from the non-Title I duties. And then finally for CE 11, we would need time and effort documentation such as a semi-annual or PARS. This documentation is used by reviewers to determine if the amount that is being charged to the Title I program is appropriate. This is actually a separate item in itself, so you can always, once again, link it from there. Moving along to CE 12, we have our supplement, not supplant. This item is not monitored for single school districts and charters. This slide mentions that the district shall only use Title I funds for to supplement state and local funds and not to supplant. To demonstrate compliance with this item, the LEA shall demonstrate that the methodology used to allocate state and local funds to each school receiving Title I funds ensures that such school receives all the state and local funds it would otherwise receive if it were not receiving assistance under Title I Part A. So basically what we're looking for is that the method for allocating state and local funds ensures that Title I funded schools are still receiving their state and local funds that they're entitled to and would normally receive in the absence of Title I Part A funds. So in order to meet the legal requirements for CE12, we will need documentation showing the methodology for allocating state and local funds. In this case, we usually ask for a narrative and a sample. There are times where we receive Excel files that show how much state and local funds are allocated and how they're allocated, which would work just fine. And we will also need duty statements from any Title I funded employees. And once again, you might recognize this from CE11. So I sound like a broken record, but feel free to just link them from CE12. And from here on, I will actually pass it on to Mr. Hamed Razawi, who will do CE13 through 17.
So welcome back, and I hope, since this is a recorded presentation, that you have taken some breaks in the middle as well. That's one of the advantages of having this virtually. So moving on, we're on CE13, and bear with us, we have 20 items. So this is comparability of services, and most of you who are working in federal and state projects capacities, you are quite familiar with this, and you also understand that it's not exactly in hiatus, but there has been a little bit of a stop for now, as in you're not uploading them through CARS. So at this point, just ensure that the LEA has written assurance that shows the following, and it's not in the slides, but I'll just kind of mention it to you, that FTE, the full-time equivalency of teachers for each site, that it meets the requirement that the law mandates, which is between 85% and 115%. And again, you know what these are. In addition to that, the number of, obviously, the whether a school gets a VP, that's equitable and comparable along the all the sites at the district level. And then you have procedures that shows that that this comparability exists at the site. The requirement for this one, let me just go over to the next slide, is it's a set of Excel files. And again, if you are working in federal and state projects capacity, you know what those forms are. If you're having a difficulty understanding what this is asking, once you have access CMT, please make a comment and ask your reviewers, like, this is what we have, is this acceptable or not? But there are two things, and one is a written assurance that your sites are comparable in the terms of the number of assigned teachers to each one, the class size, whether they get a VP after a certain amount, or how many office manager plus another support for the office, that everything is comparable. And I think I'll leave it at that. If you have any question, please do contact those folks. The next item is, I'm glad that Gert mentioned a little bit about this. This is what's called, we call it CE14 time and effort. And some of you know it as time accounting in the past. So basically, we're not asking for every employee. We're only asking for employees that are paid with Title I Part A. And the charges are actually reflective of accurately and of the times that they're spending, and they're reasonable and necessary in accordance with the Title I program. So what do we expect from you? Most of you who are in fiscal world, you know that we put a percentage for employees. We're saying, for instance, 30% from LCFF, 45% from Title I. That's fine, that's perfect. There is no problem with that. But just please ensure that the employees and the site level, that you need additional documentation. In other words, an employee, if we ask them, you're paid 37% of your time, how many hours? Tell me your schedule. How many hours do you work with Title I students? the amount of time that they talk about, it should roughly match 37%. Their answer cannot be 37% of my day, because they have to substantiate that out of the 6 hours that they possibly work, the 37 actually matches the amount of time. So in other words, you need policies and procedures that shows how they're keeping that time and effort at the site level. What do we look for this? We used to use terms from the fiscal world, such as PARS and semi-annual. We do not use those words. Those are certainly some of the ways that we could do, but it needs to be supported by a system of internal controls, and then that each site consistently uses those internal controls and the guidelines that you have set forward for them. It's worth mentioning that if you're, before I move to C14 evidence, it's worth mentioning that if your review has a fiscal monitoring portion, this item will be deferred to them, so we don't make your work duplicate. So if we have an FM or fiscal monitoring portion for your LEA, we defer this item to them. What are the evidence requests? Obviously, as I mentioned, some kind of records, and as you can see, we leave it at that, whichever way you do it at the site. Policies and procedures, these are internal documents that you have, and there's a kind of a joke that should you win the lottery and you no longer work there, the next person who comes at the district, they need to have a document to follow, or at least to start to follow from the beginning. So that's what the policies and procedures are. Duty statement, Girk already mentioned, and the distinction between duty statements and job description, and the position control obviously shows who is paid and how much and what percentage of their pay is from Title I, Part A. And again, it's worth mentioning that we only concern ourselves with Title I, Part A at this point. This is a straightforward one, similar to the primary language or of the families. This is the inventory. So as you could see, anytime you use Title I funds and you purchase items that per item, the cost is $500 or more, you need to keep a detailed inventory. And what is in that inventory? Please look at the instrument or the CMT for the list of columns that need to be included in that inventory. The second bullet talks about something that happens once in a while. For that, not only you need to keep an inventory, but prior to purchasing anything that costs $5,000 Title I funds, you need a prior written approval from CDE. Straightforward. Again, $5,000 for a site using Title I funds, it's a large amount. So just like for purchasing that item, you need a prior approval. If that item is no longer useful to you for whatever reason, and you want to discard them, so you need the same sort of approval from CDE. The second bullet talks about a physical inventory of the property. Please know that that's not the only thing that the inventory requires. There's a number of other columns that that document needs to have. And again, check the CMT and our instrument, and it lists all the requirements for an inventory. And of course, the inventory records, and then within it, one of the requirement is a physical check of the item, but just as an example, it has to say where it's located. Site itself is not sufficient, such as you could say room number 15 or auditorium, multipurpose room, things like that. If it's a district office, the same applies there. Moving on, this is what we call the mirror or the other half of CE3 that Girk already talked about. So let me make this really easy for you. As Girk mentioned, that if you have made multiple attempts and meaningful attempts, and either A, you have not reached any kind of contacts with them, they have not responded back, well, you substantiate that you have made your efforts and they just did not respond. Or they did respond back and they said, thank you for the offer, but we're not interested. If that's the case, then this item is easier to take care of, simply because this is not monitored. There is no services to be monitored. So we make CE 16 not monitored, and we put for legal justification that there is no services to be offered. But if they say, yes, we would like to, yes, please, what are those services, and you have an understanding, please know that you control, because these are your site and your district, I should say, that funds are from your district. You control whether it's a human service, meaning a person goes and provides tutoring, or, for instance, they just want a couple of pieces of technology. Whatever it is, you control, and you ensure that the services are provided based on the set of expectations that you have. So whatever services that they do, you obviously inspect it, you ensure that they work for those students, and that if there are employees, that they are independent of that school or of any religious organizations. So the contracts or the employments that you offer, everything you control. The evidence request, again, if there are services to be provided, it would be, well, how much funding have you provided to them? And we usually will see that in cards anyway ahead of time. So the expenditure report, and then more than likely, if you're using a third-party contract, who is it? How much money are you paying? And the invoice would be appropriate for that. Moving on to items that more than likely is extremely easy for you, because sometimes it's not applicable, and sometimes when it is applicable, it's just a black and white. You just get the document uploaded. CE 17, early childhood development, over 90% of the time, we as reviewers, we do not monitor this because there is nothing to be monitored. So what I mean by that is that if, and there's a big if you're using Title I funds for early childhood education below the age of compulsory school attendance, then those services have to comply with the performance standards of Head Start. So in the off chance that you are providing that, then we would see that in your SPSA ahead of time, and you just do two pieces. One of them is that curriculum, which is provided by Head Start. You just tell us what is that, or if you have a sample of it. The second one is you ask one of those wonderful teachers for a lesson plan documentation, just those two pieces, and you upload them. If, and more than likely the answer is no, we're not doing that, please, as fast as you can, make a comment under CE 17 that no, we're not funding any services with Title I funds that fit this description, and your reviewer will thank you for it and quickly will make that item not monitored.
So thank you, Hamed. So I will be taking over C18. So this is the School Accountability Report Card, also known as the SARC. This item requires that the district annually issue and update a SARC for each school. The SARC should contain all required elements and be publicized. Most LEAs, they'll post them on their district website or for individual schools on their school sites websites. Things such as per pupil expenditures, student achievement on assessment, the number of credentialed teachers are just a few examples of some of the elements that need to be included in the SARC. To get a full list, just please feel free to take a look at CE 18 under the instrument, and this is a pretty straightforward item. And finally, the LEA needs to notify parents and guardians that hard copies of the SARC will be provided on request. So for this item, the evidence requests include posting the most recent SARC for each school that is being reviewed. So if you have two school sites that are being reviewed, just make sure to upload two SARCs, one for each school site. Notification is SARC, hard copies available. Availability can come in many forms. We commonly see this as a simple disclaimer that's included in the registration packets that get sent home to the students early on in the year. So when uploading the evidence into CMT, LEAs can usually upload the entire document. And what they'll do is they'll highlight for the reviewer where and on what page the notification is posted. And sometimes they'll even post a comment saying, hey, just FYI, please take a look at page 50 of the registration packet for such and such school, where we notified parents of hard copies being available for the SARC. CE19 is the school site evaluation of Title I program effectiveness. The idea behind this item is to ensure that there's some sort of progress monitoring, or I like to say temperature check, that's taking place in regards to Title I spending and expenditures. School operating a school-wide program shall annually review and regularly monitor the implementation of and results of the Title I program. This involves using various sources of data and indicators to determine if the program has been effective in reaching its goal, and then making updates and revisions to the plan as needed based upon the findings of the evaluation. For school-wide programs, this evaluation will occur with your school site council. So that way we can include parents and stakeholders in the conversation. If you're a targeted assistance program, you're still required to review your program on an ongoing basis for effectiveness and making revisions as necessary. When working with TOSs are actually not required to have the evaluation done with their SSC, since a SPSA is not required for a TOS, but they must include stakeholders in the process. There's actually a separate presentation that's exclusively for CE16. So if you're interested, just make sure to tune into that. And it's where two of our fellow colleagues are actually going into CE19 in a lot more detail. And they actually have resources and examples that they can share with you if you need support with this item. So for CE19, if you're a school-wide Title I program, you'll need to provide the SPSA for the schools that are under review, along with documentation showing that the SSC reviewed the SPSA. As a reminder, these first two bullets are actually evidence requests that you can simply link from earlier items in the CE instrument in CMT. Additionally, for swaps, you'll need to provide evaluation reports and other evidence that show that the school site council was involved in the evaluation of the program. For TOS programs, you'll need to provide evidence and documentation of the program being evaluated, but as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to go through the school site council since SSC is actually not required for TOS programs. Finally, if there are any modifications or adjustments that were made to the program based upon the evaluation results, both TOS and school-wide programs will want to hold on to documentations associated with those changes, whether it's meeting minutes or anything else that reflects changes and adjustments that were made to the program. The following on this slide are just some examples of questions to consider when conducting your program evaluation, and they're nice guiding questions. So the first one is, what points of data do we need to gather and use? Remember that the evaluation that is conducted must be data-driven, so focus on what data would be effective in looking at. How faithful was the program implemented? And if it wasn't to fidelity, what needs to change? What is the analysis of the data, and how effective was the plan itself? And finally, based upon the analysis and evaluation, what changes or modifications do we need to make to get better results? When we're discussing changes and modifications, it doesn't necessarily mean changing everything and starting from scratch. But if you're not getting the results that you want from your kids and your schools, then there should be modifications to our approach, and ultimately that should lead to adjustments to the SPSA or planning documents from year to year. Last but not least, we have CE20. This is our paraprofessional requirements. This item mentions that LEAs will ensure that paras working in Title I funded schools are qualified and meet state certification and licensure requirements in at least one of three ways. So the first way that your paras, have to be considered qualified is having at least 2 years of study in an institution of higher learning. The second way a para can meet state requirements is if they hold an associate's degree or higher. And the third way an LEA can ensure that the paras meet state certification standards is by ensuring that paras have knowledge of and ability to assist in instructing reading, writing, and math as appropriate to the responsibilities that will be assigned to them. And this knowledge and ability can be demonstrated through a local or state assessment. And with the current shortage of paras in the state, this third method is something that we're seeing more and more commonly. So as far as evidence requests go, in order to meet the legal requirements of CE20, LEAs will need to upload the non-certificated staff authorization. This is usually a sortable spreadsheet that includes the names of the paras at the Title I schools that are being reviewed, along with how each para meets the state certification requirements, which will be one of the three ways that I mentioned in the previous slides. The last piece of evidence needed will be a list of all certificated staff at the reviewed schools. This list will need to include full names of all certificated staff along with their credentials that they hold. And if you would like to link the same credentials from CE8, you can. Just make sure to highlight the certificated staff who supervise or oversee a Title I funded para. So now that Hamed and I have covered CE 1 through 20, we understand that it is a lot of information and evidence. And in order to make things as easier as possible, we wanted to just share some best practices with you guys. So the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you determine which CE items are applicable and not applicable to your LEA and schools. So depending on the circumstances, there will be a few items that do not apply to you, and knowing them will definitely save you a lot of time and stress. So for example, there's a significant number of LEAs who don't use the Title I funds for early childhood education, which was CE 17. So therefore CE 17 is often not monitored. So just doing a little bit of work ahead of time and knowing what is monitored and what not will save you a lot of valuable time and stress, especially during a process that can be daunting. Also, the FPM process, as I mentioned, it takes a lot of work and time, especially when you're being monitored by so many different programs and some reviews. So if you can, what we suggest is involving all the relevant LEA and school staff, make it a team effort and delegate appropriately. If you feel comfortable, give more than one person the ability to upload items into CMT. And it's just so much easier and the process goes by so much quicker when you make it a team effort. Having one person in charge of the whole process just makes it very challenging and difficult. Also, when uploading evidence into CMT, please use specific titles and provide a file description below it. When you upload, there's a small box under the title that allows you to write in a description. So for example, we sometimes have reviews where there might be 4 schools under review and we get 4 separate documents uploaded and they say SPSAs and no other details or anything. And it just makes it it just takes up a lot more time and is a lot more challenging. So just to make things easier for everyone, please use titles and be as descriptive as possible when uploading information in files. Continuing on with the best practices, when I was a site administrator, one of my mentors used to always say that clarity precedes competence. And I think that's a very applicable quote, or it's a very applicable quote to the FPM process. So please respond to reviewers when we request additional information and address all parts of the request. I can confidently say that every review that we have will require further documentation because things are just not initially clear all the time. I always tell my LEAs that when we request additional information, it's not that we're saying you're doing something wrong. It's just we need further clarity. So just please respond to us as quickly as possible. And the quicker you respond, the quicker we can respond back to you and hopefully clear items faster. So usually the longer LEAs wait to communicate, the more challenging things become, and it just takes, it just becomes more stressful. And when we're dealing with timelines, it doesn't make things easier for anyone. And then also when uploading additional documents, please just add a comment into CMT. Sometimes reviewers are working on several reviews at one time, so a little extra communication is appreciated from all parties. And then we definitely understand that we've covered a lot of information in a very short period of time. So we definitely understand that there are probably still questions that you have that we didn't have an opportunity to address, or perhaps didn't do in as much detail as you might have needed. Based upon your geographic region, we as reviewers are assigned, regions are assigned a number, and that number will correspond to a specific consultant. So there's been some changes to the team. So if you're in either region 2 or 4, what you'll need to do is go into CMT and find out which consultant has been assigned to you for your review. For region 9, it's Mr. Chiming Yang. I myself, Gurkamal Jagpal, have region 1 and 8. And Hamed, my colleague in this presentation, has region 10. If you're region 5 and 6, what you'll need to do is the same thing. Just go into CMT and see which reviewer has been assigned to you. Linda Moscatelli has region 7, and Mr. Olawale Olakoya has region 11. And then region 3 is shared by all consultants. So those individuals will also need to go into CMT to see who is assigned to them. So once you know who you'll be working with, we recommend that you please reach out to us early and often, and feel free to ask any questions that you might have. And we're here to support you and provide clarity and just answer any questions, address any concerns. We are definitely here to support you guys in your FPM process. And then speaking of questions, myself, Hamed, and the team will actually be hosting a live virtual Q&A session on Wednesday, July 29 from 1:40 to 3:40 p.m. You may also email your questions prior to the session. The email address that you're going to want to use is timso@cde.ca.gov. With that, we wanted to thank all our educators for taking care of our children and families. And we understand and appreciate all the hard work you have been doing in these unprecedented and challenging times. And please remember that it is a team effort. We're here to help you and to make things as easy as possible for you. So on that note, I just wanted to say, on behalf of myself and Hamed, thank you once again, and we hope to see you on Wednesday during our Q&A session.